One of the things about social media is that you get to learn a lot more about famous people than you ever did because you hear it from their mouths. So I wouldn't have to make this statement but for the social media. Like, I don't think I agree with Stephen King on hardly anything. But for decades, I have enjoyed his novels. Um, the Dark Tower series in particular. There's something in that series, I guess kind of a spoiler alert if you hadn't read them, because I believe there's 7 of them and they're all beefy. But sort of the underlying theme of them is that it's like a battle against entropy. There is a set of what are called beams that uphold the universe, basically order. There is some like pandemonium that could be unleashed. He had a word for it. It's not coming to me right now, but there's kind of like sort of a cosmic thin blue line of some kind. There's some supporting structure that supports the world, and there are different guardians to these beams, and the forces of entropy or evil in this world, discordia, I think that was the word. The forces of discordia are just quietly munching away at those beams through various means. And I think that is such a metaphor for kind of the predicament that the world finds itself in, like at least the West, I would say culturally. I think we take things for granted, like infrastructure and things working, living in relative safety. I think that those of us who have those things don't always think about what makes them possible, kind of what underlies that. Because it's a big world and there's a lot of different ways to live, and there's places where discordia would be an appropriate word. So it's like places where civil war has taken over, or a certain kind of despotism. But there are things that guard against that, like beams, like the beams in Stephen King's universe. And so there's this struggle, in the struggle to preserve the beams. The forces of good are, in Stephen King's universe, thin. It's just Roland of Gilead. And he is kind of like a Jedi with a 6-shooter. But I don't even think he's consciously aware of what he's trying to preserve. I just know he's pursuing the Red King, or at least that's how it ends up. And I think he's aware who that is. Yeah. But the forces arrayed against him are overwhelming. There are mysterious vampires who use robotic wolves to periodically raid villages and steal children whose soul essence is drained, and after which they are runt, ONT, a condition wherein it's like they, almost like they become pituitary giants externally, but they suffer like in arrested development internally, and they've had their life essence somehow drained. And then this life essence is used to fuel these individuals who are they have some kind of psychic gift, and they use it to break down the beams that hold back discordia. So if you think about it, what thought precipitates action? So it's the battle of what's going on between people's ears that precedes the physical manifestation of conflict, disorder, discordia. So what gets cultivated in people's minds? It seems to me there are multiple factions, and it's like societies are being divided. And it's just very strange to me, because it's like, the analogy I would use is like I saw a video where a woman and a man were walking down the street, and a couple of kind of thuggish guys were coming in the opposite direction, and one of them groped or said something maybe obscene, but it was enough that it set the guy off into attack mode. And he looked like he was a trained fighter. He was just pummeling these guys. But when he launched into that, his woman tried to hold him back for a sec. Like she tried to hold him back from doing that. But once it was on, there's no going back. So in that split second when she is attacking, or rather he is attacking them, and she's trying to stop him, he is up against three people. For a split second, he's up against three people. So he and his wife or girlfriend are aside, and then the thugs are on the other side. But this, whatever it is inside this woman that gave her this impulse to try to stop her man from doing something, could have compromised their safety. That's kind of like a microcosmic example of, I think, what is going on. Like, another example I'll give you, and I cannot cite the source, it was related to like a concealed carry type situation. He was an off-duty police officer, off-duty FBI agent, an off-duty lawman, and he was with his woman, his wife, girlfriend, whatever. They were out in public, and he had a gun concealed, and they were confronted by robbers, and she audibly said, "Don't pull out your gun," and they killed him instantly. I'm not going to say that I agree with anything Andrew Tate says, but there's something that he said that I have thought before this, and have probably even said on this channel before that, but that different types of people have different stakes in the face of the same scenario. Like, for our sort of evolutionary incubation time, we have been small villages, and the danger to any band of people in that hunter-gatherer situation, or even agrarian, really, I mean, is raiders. And what happens in that raiding situation? That was very common throughout human history. We can see it in the movement of Y chromosomes from like Central Asia into Europe with the Yamnaya, the Indo-Europeans. I mean, it's basically kill the men and take the women. So things happen evolutionarily based on selection. And so the sort of the selection process for men over tens of thousands of years, given that reality, is that men would typically have to fight to the death. Like, regardless of the odds, the men are going to have to fight, because their reward for failing is death. So, whereas the women, now, there are different cultures, different types of people. They're all going to react differently. But what would happen to the women is different. And it's not good either, obviously. But it's different. So subsequent to that defeat of that tribe's warriors, so some women are going to, resist and die, and then others are going to survive. And that, over a long period of time, that creates a selection process. So a society can be divided and conquered in this way. So you end up with, say, 3 or 4 factions. One being the men of the village, the other being the women of the village, and the other being the raiders, and the fourth being perhaps the raiders' allies. So I just see that as kind of like a microcosm of what's going on. You have different segments of Western society. You have some who basically believe that, like, diametrically opposing cultures can occupy the same space. And then I guess, there's no sense of like reciprocation of there doesn't seem to be an ability to extrapolate that, like, the tolerance that allows the changing of a society like that won't be reciprocated when the demographics change. Anyway, this is getting to a head. I saw a video. They were talking about the island there off of the coast of France, and how there may be a civil war there. And I don't know, that society, I've never been there, but it makes me think of like an open air prison in a way. They've got, like, they had a bunch of cameras set up everywhere. People are, not free to say what they want. Your weapons are like contraband, and they can, like, if your house is basically like your cell, they can come search it for contraband. I don't know. But in a prison, you have the strongest groups are the ones that are the most unified, and not the other ones that are divided against each other. And so, I'll be frank, right? We're talking about radical Islam, or, basically the aspect of it that is a conquering religion. And so the indigenous population of that island is divided against itself. And one of those factions has invited this conquering religion onto the island. And they don't make any apologies about it. I'm just describing reality. It doesn't make apologies for its proselytization because it believes it's the truth, or its adherents believe that. So it's just clear as a day. It just makes one wonder why. Like, why were there greater ideas that somehow human beings would transcend the patterns of history, the fact that humans are expansionist. It just boggles the mind. And there's going to be a price to be paid eventually. So eventually what happens is there is a conflict, and it goes one way or the other, or there's no conflict and there's just an eventual handing over of the keys. But this is a very taboo subject for a lot of people, I guess. But it's the reality. You can see it coming now. It's going to go one way or the other, and this is not a call for violence, but just speculation on whether or not it could happen. There are already like no-go areas, and apparently now there's a two-tier justice system in that country. So you don't have equality under the law. It's almost like they're trying to make this happen. I don't know if they're trying to precipitate a conflict that will then create the conditions under which a technocratic authoritarian rule can be established. Certainly the one faction would like to create an order based on Islamic law, Sharia. It's just, and I guess this scenario will either be played out or acknowledged and addressed in all of the countries that are going this way demographically. Yeah. Anyway, so the beams have been chewed at for a long time. And it's like, it just feels like we're getting close enough to where people can see, like, kind of where things are going. I don't know. I mean, you just have to look at human history to get a sense of what happens. I mean, look what happened on the Iberian Peninsula. Look what happened in Eastern Europe. Look what happened everywhere outside of the Arabian Peninsula. In the years that followed the death of the Prophet Muhammad. And this is not just Islam. It's just human beings are expansionist. The Romans, every major nation, Islam is just like the vehicle for the Arabian nation. I guess you could say Catholicism has been the vehicle for the Roman nation. I think these beams that hold up society, I'm going all over the place, I know, but these beams that uphold society, I think you have to, in the face of mass conditioning technology, that to reinforce the things that uphold order in society, it's done at the micro level. It's people who are either atomized or radicalized. Um, it's done when they are kind of off by themselves with no third place. You've probably heard this concept before of the third place. Like in the old days, it would be church, or in the southeastern United States, before air conditioning, it would be like the front porch in the evening. Like all the neighbors would get together. This was before I was born. I heard somebody tell me this who's in their 80s now, but they lived in eastern North Carolina, and people would just gather on their porches in the evening and enjoy the cool. But in that place, the air conditioning kind of brought everybody back in and kind of atomized people just a little bit. But a third place where there can be some mutual supportiveness. People who are community oriented, and I'm not trying to be negative, but I mean insular. They support each other because they don't have really the support of the society at large. So they play by a different set of rules. Maybe they live multi-generationally, they help each other out, that kind of thing. That type of interaction is lost to a lot of people in the West. They don't have, and the idea of there being any kind of like mutually supportive and sort of exclusive community, it's like completely forbidden. But there are contexts in which it can manifest that aren't forbidden, like small churches, small enough in number that everybody can be accountable to one another. And I do think that these types of convictions can help alleviate the paradox of choice that technology has brought upon young people. It has, like, this is manosphere content, but it's sort of magnified the expression of hypergamy in women. So it creates the paradox of choice. There's like this idea that the next best thing is out there. Well, if there is being part of a community where like doctrine matters, and beliefs matters, tradition matters. There's an idea that a marriage is meant to last a lifetime, and that children are a blessing. Then alignment on those issues takes precedence over the factors that sort of drive hypergamy. Like, it's important that that person is really committed to living in a certain way that is conducive to a wholesome and chaste life that's fruitful. And if that type of a situation prevails for enough people, then it creates a stability in a society. And I'm not just talking about for like Christians. I don't know enough about Islam, honestly, but I would think that any individual who wants to commit acts of violence in its name as an individual, unless they are like born and conditioned in a community that essentially is like at war, their violence is a function of some kind of radicalization, isolation, like brainwashing. So I'm sure there are communities where that's not a thing. But the cultivation of identity in people is really at the heart of, is what intensifies this, being so identified with a doctrine that, you know, one wants to expand it by violent means. And that's just like identification with views. There's identification with bloodline, tribe, all kinds of things. They're all idols, and they all, to the extent that they are the object of attention, mutually exclusive to the full alignment with the truth of this moment right now. So it's like all of these conceptual things, all these ideas, they're obsessed over, and they create a deprivation of sense. But it's the sense that's being deprived is, it's not known. Like if you plug your ears, you know you've been deprived of your hearing. But there's a sense that we lost in the time before the conceptual self was constructed from I, and there's an amnesia of states that occurs after that. But to recapture that spaciousness requires a surrender, a submission. So you could say that this is the submission or the surrender to the will of God, which is ironic because in Islam, I understand this is really the thrust of it. I said I don't know a lot about Islam, but I do understand that it means submission and surrender to God. My experience has been that if you surrender to the scope, the perfection, and the sovereignty of God's will, and understanding that God cannot be what anyone conceives of God to be. The finite cannot comprehend the infinite. All we can know is what we've been exposed to experientially. And I can testify that there is a peace that goes beyond understanding, and it comes from being in surrender to the truth. The truth being all but every notion that proposes an alternative to what is right now, by virtue of not seeing perfection in it, which the prerequisite to which is the knowledge of good and evil. And that requires the identification with one to judge things good and evil. But to be free, there must be a dying unto that self, which brings one to that point of surrender to the perfection of divine will.